Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have my friend Cliff Gray of Flat Tops Wilderness Guides. Cliff, how you doing? I haven't talked to you in a while.
All good. I've been busy as you have, but I appreciate getting back on with you.
Yeah, I need to get you down there on a Gould's turkey hunt. That's probably at the top of your list.
It actually is. I only got a couple. My wife Amy
You're
had
so
a tag
full
here.
of bull.
It is, man. I'm up for it. I got the bug back because Amy had a tag, and I only had like 2 days before I went to Canada this last month to hunt with her.
I forgot about that Miriam's tag.
It was good. She didn't end up getting one, but Amy hasn't done a whole lot of hunting, so we kind of worked through a little bit of that stuff, but she had a good time. We needed just a couple more days to kind of get it figured out. But I hunted
birds around?
A lot. Oh yeah. It's weird because they only move in to the area that we were hunting. I didn't see any until like a week and a half before the season. Then all of a sudden they showed up where I had planned on hunting, which was great. So it worked out. But yeah, we played around with several. All the both days. Unfortunately, because we have the little bitty kiddo Wyatt, it's hard. We have to get a babysitter to go hunting on her tag. So we actually just hunted in the afternoons. And what we ran into is just every time we got into turkeys every day, but they were just all henned up the whole time. So we had some fun and had some interaction with turkeys, but just never got like the perfect opportunity for it. But I hunted a lot of them, in my teenage years, and in college I had some opportunities to go places. So I got the bug back. I'll take you up on it.
Right on, man. Sounds good. So, let's see. The last time I talked to you, you had just kind of finished doing some Aoudad hunts, and then I was in Colorado in March, and then turkey season, and then you were going to head to off on your bear trips. Tell me a little bit about that. How it went. How was it up there this year? Where were you? All that kind of stuff.
No, I can zip through it because it was kind of a whirlwind May. I came back, I think, on June 4th, and what I did was I went up. I stayed 2 weeks in a southern area that I work with a guy there that would be just south of Lillooet, and then after that I spent a few days with a mutual friend. I know that we have Ben Storak there who bought an area. So I hung out with him for a couple days. I've been working with Ben on a few things. And then towards the end of the month, I headed north of Prince George with a guy that I've worked on a bunch of bear hunts up there. So all super different areas. I would say generally the season was great. I think in terms of, how, all the hunts that I was either there for or booked for guys or was involved with, I think I did 26 hunts and we killed somewhere around 25 bears. So overall it was a great season. There were quite a few guys actually killed 2 bears, and then there were a handful of guys that didn't kill bears. And we did have a couple weeks that were tough. One week in particular, our week and a half time frame that was tough in one of the areas. Probably the toughest I've seen it. And then on the other spectrum of that, in the northern area, the last week I was there, I've never seen it any better than that, and I can't imagine actually it being better than that. I think as a group of hunters, it was a corporate group I took up there of 6 guys. I mean, I think we were seeing across the board, if you collected everybody, probably 30 bears a day amongst the group. So it doesn't get any better.
So how does a hunt like that work? How does it work? I mean, is it glassing all day? Is it sitting bait? How do you do this?
Yeah, so in BC, baiting bears isn't allowed. Fortunately, for 2 reasons, it doesn't really matter. Because the country there is pretty conducive to spot and stock hunts, and that's all that we do up there. And those spot and stock hunts are in the south, where, or let's say like in the coastal mountain range, where I do. There's two different areas that I hunt with guys. The one area is very much like kind of more natural habitat. You'll hunt snow slides in May. You know, that's, you can glass that country pretty easily. Get across from it and just glass all those natural snow slides. They tend to green up first, right? Once the snow comes off those, or comes off even just the edges of a snow slide, and the sun starts hitting them, that's like your first green grass, and those bears will hit that. So that's what you're primarily doing, is glassing bears up on those slides. And then, so there, a fair amount of BC is like that. But the majority of spot and stock in British Columbia is based on logging activity. So you're still glassing, but you're glassing logging infrastructure, basically roads. And those roads, what they do is when they put them in, they're not any good for bears when they first put them in. There's no vegetation on them. But after a couple of years, your shoulders come in with really thick grass. And what will happen is those bears will, it's almost like baiting in a sense, because, I mean, you're talking about huge swaths of timber in British Columbia, and all the bears that inhabit that stuff come to those roads, because that's the first green grass that comes up because of the exposure. And so there's kind of, on those roads, a lot of times you'll get where you can glass switchbacks, right? You can glass across a canyon, and you're glassing a logging road that's got a bunch of grass on it, and you're trying to catch bears on it, and then you can get on them. Those situations are really conducive to bow hunting, because the roads, if you can get your wind right, hunting them on a logging road is the best way to do it. They're a little bit tougher on a big steep snow slide or something like that. So you have those two areas you'll find them in, and then the other area, and this is kind of what most people think about, but it really only equates to probably a quarter of your hunting, and that's just glassing. They call them cut blocks in the U.S. Most people call them clear cuts, but basically clear cuts that are, say, somewhere in the 3-year plus age, where like the undergrowth has come back, some green grass, but also just the other type of vegetation has come back. So you can still glass bears up in it, but it's not so thick that you can't see them anymore. So that's primarily the types of areas you hunt. It varies more. Like if you go further north, so like once you get to Prince George area and above, which is not, I guess I'll kind of go back, Jay, like when you think about the areas that BC is known for in terms of big black bears, Vancouver Island's going to be the most well-known, right? The most expensive hunts. They got the highest bear density, all those components. There, it's the same thing. You're either going to, some of those guys operate out of boats, and they're actually hunting, coastal habitat. But a lot of the Vancouver Island hunts are still on logging infrastructure. They're hunting logging roads, cut blocks, the same deal. When you go into the coastal mountains, it's really the same kind of topography, except for they don't have as much really the ocean component hunts, right? Once you go north, and those are the areas that everybody knows when they think about big BC black bears. Once you go north, like let's say you go all the way to Prince George, which is really like, I don't know, it's not quite 2/3 the way north in British Columbia. Up there, the topography is not as intense. It obviously doesn't feel coastal. They've got longer winters there, all that, but they have really intense logging activity in some areas, and that's created like some pretty fantastic bear habitat, and it's created a huge, even though the bears there don't grow as fast as the coastal bears, just because there's so much density. If you like, the guys that I work with up there are guys that are really specific about how many bears they kill, because those populations up there are going to be much more susceptible to harvest because the bears grow slower. Because I mean, you're talking like very, way high north. But if you get into areas that haven't been overhunted on the bear front, you can kill just as big of bears, see just as many, if not more, bears in that country. And the reason is because it's just, they've kind of created an abnormal ecosystem because of the intense amount of logging activity. And the reason that logging activity has occurred is they have pine beetle really bad in that country. So for better or worse, they've given the logging companies kind of a blank check to go in there and really, really cut a lot of timber, and that's opened up a lot of bear habitat. Does that give you kind of a feel for it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm looking at your Instagram page. Encourage the listeners to check it out. It's Cliff Gray, but it's Gry with no A, so it's Cliff Gray. And I'm looking at some pictures here. Leave the A out. You'll find Cliff Gray, otherwise known as my friend that went to Stanford. There's a picture here with, I mean, it looks like, what is that, 9 bears, and then you say it happened in 4 days? 4 days, and there's just slayed them.
Yeah, so that's the last group we took, a corporate group of guys, really good guys, but they were short on time.
How old are some of these bears?
So yeah, that's the thing, is in that picture, so that there's 9 bears there. There's 2 bears legitimate over 7 foot, which is a huge black bear. Doesn't matter where you're at, that's huge. And then I think other than one of the other bears, one of the color phase bears was under 6 foot. Every other bear in those pictures is between 6 and 7'3" or 7'4". So that there's you're not going to get better quality than that. And that was what happened on that group, was they were tight on time, as a lot of business guys are. So usually they're 6-day hunts. We stuck it into 4 days. They all killed bears, and 2 of the guys killed 2 bears. And we had several others. We had some opportunities that were missed, stuff like that. But yeah, when it's good, it's good. But that was basically a virgin area. It hadn't been hunted. It hunted very little in the last decade.
Man.
And that's why you get an area like that, and the bears can be huge. And getting back to your question, probably some of those bears in those pictures might be 15 plus years old. You know, that's what people don't understand. It does take time, you know, like, because I've seen it in areas. I mean, now I've spent enough time there, and I've been there over you know, time frames. Like if you start getting in the areas, and this includes Vancouver Island. From, you know, I haven't spent a lot of time on Vancouver Island, so I can't be, you know, I don't have like the background in it to tell you this is 100% true. But anecdotally, and a lot of the research I've done with guys, is even on coastal areas where the bears reproduce quicker, they grow faster. If bears are overhunted, you're still going to have them there if there's habitat, but it takes a few years to grow the big bears. And then as you go to like a little less perfect habitat, it becomes way more important how much pressure's on them, right? I mean, that's probably why, you know, honestly, areas like Idaho and, you know, some of these other western states don't produce real big bears. I mean, it's really, they generally produce, you know, like a couple, like really when you look, if you guys are truly squaring bears and stuff in western states, it's really rare that guys are killing bigger than 5.5, 6 foot bears. It just is. And that's because...
Explain how they measure them.
Yeah, so...
Explain how they get that squared, like where do they measure from?
Yeah, so on the measuring thing, there's 2 metrics guys use, right? They measure skull, and then they measure hides. All the scoring guys like Pope and Young, Boone and Crockett, SCI, they're going to use skull. Really, the only reason skull is used is because it's the only thing that can be reliably measured, right, from the animal. So those systems, but the reality
is it one of those
hunting,
deals like when we go fishing, my 22-inch fish is always going to be bigger than your 16-inch fish, but it just depends on who measures it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a component of that. But I think the thing about it is yeah, I mean, all the organizations that score, it's always on skull. Anybody who's a big bear hunter, to be honest with you, Jay, really wants big hides. that's the reality, right? That's what people have in the house. That's what people see. So, like, when you really talk to most bear guides and guys that do a lot of bear hunting, they're really more interested in squared hides. And when I say squared, what it is, you lay the hide out, after the bear's been fully skinned, and you're going to go toe to tail is one measurement, and then tip of the front paw on the left side to tip of the front paw on the right side. That's your second measurement, and you're going to average those two, and that's your squared number. And the reason that
that can get skewed real quick depending on who's measuring it. So you hear, oh yeah, they're 7.5 foot bears, and that's sometimes they're 6.5, right?
Well, yeah. So so what happens is guys don't actually square the bears. Guys will lay the hide down and they'll stretch it toe to or nose to tail, right? And they'll say, well, this is an 8-foot black bear. Well, the problem is that then when you measure across the bear, it's only 5 foot because you've stretched it, right? So when you square a bear, you lay it out and you do the two measurements, but you don't touch the hide in between. So if you're truly squaring a bear, it stops. It kind of mitigates a lot of the manipulation of stretching the hide one way. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the problem is particularly in the States, guys don't square the bears. What they do is they pull them as taut as they can, nose to tail, and they're saying they're killing 7-foot bears, and it's really a 5.5 foot bear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm not a bear hunter. I do have some questions because we got quite a few bears on the Ot6 Ranch, which you've been to, so I'll have some questions about that. But in general, are boars, is it looked at like when you go, like if you talk to a guy that's a serious bear hunter, is it like I only shoot boars, or is shooting sows? You know how in the sheep community it's like you only shoot rams. Like, yeah, they give you tags, but like, they want rams.
Yeah.
Or, guys want to shoot bucks. I mean, they're not like, hey, I shot a doe. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But is there any stigma in the bear community to shooting boars or sows?
Yeah, so I would say there is. I mean, any of these spot and stock hunts, I mean, the focus is, and this is universal to the areas, is 6-foot plus boars. Any of the guys that have pretty big bear operations, that's like the focus, right? Now, the reality is, and I've hunted bears quite a bit myself, but I've hunted bears with guys that have, killed hundreds of bears with hunters, and the reality is that there's with black bears in particular, when you get into big sows that don't have cubs, in compared to like a decent sized boar, sows get killed. It just happens. They're one of the hardest things to tell the sex on, so it does happen.
Like, so that they're shooting sows, but they really are going off size, and they're trying to figure it out, but they're thinking they're shooting boars, but they're actually shooting some giant sows. And is it kind of frowned upon, or is it just part of the deal?
Yeah, no, I would say that it's not really frowned upon. If it's a big dry sow, a big old dry sow, it's not that big of a deal. You know what I mean? I would say like the one picture you're talking about, out of those 8 bears, one of them's a sow. And that's kind of what you see, is most guys are gonna, most of it's really driven by the outfitters. Like, if the guy has a good bear business and the bear component is important to him, it's just he doesn't want to kill sows because he wants to produce more bears, right? It doesn't matter if, so that's the reality. I would say it's not like I would say like in the lion hunting world, there's way bigger stigma against like killing female lions, right? Yeah. Right, the bear deal is not like that. I will openly say here in Colorado, a dry sow is free game. I'd shoot it 100 times over. You know what I mean? And not feel bad about it at all. So I think it's not that big a deal. It's generally just a size thing. Guys want to shoot big bears, and the boars tend to be bigger bears.
And another question I would have is, you know how a lot of times in areas, mule deer does have twin fawns. It's really, really common. Some areas it's not. Mm-hmm. Do bears typically have, multiple cubs, or is it real, what's the most common to have, two cubs, one cub? What's the general rule of thumb?
So what I've been told, I'll tell you what kind of like the research says, and then what I've seen is that, and it kind of matches up, so it doesn't really matter. But basically, if it's good habitat and light winters, good hibernation conditions, they're gonna have bigger litters, right? So if it's in a tougher area, you're more likely to have one cub. A lot of the heavily logged areas in BC, the guides will tell you it's really common to see sows with 3 cubs. Really? Which, for instance, in Colorado, I personally, seeing 3 cubs, I have seen it, but it's an anomaly. You know what I mean? And what's interesting to me is that even in Colorado, I see a lot more twins than I did when I was a kid. And I don't know why that is, if it's habitat driven or what. But they say it's basically based on conditions, and then how well they hibernate. And actually, bears can absorb the fetus. They can absorb the fetus in hibernation. It's very common if they drop below a certain amount of body fat. And so,
wow.
And the other thing about bears, which is interesting, is they delay implantation. So if they can get bred any time, let's say, most of them are going to get bred in the last week of May through the first 2 weeks of June. Those really, they're going to all start gestation at the same time. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter when they're bred. They can delay the implantation because they really, the gestation period really happens during hibernation, right? And the cubs are born during hibernation. So what happens is they go into hibernation with low body fat, or it's just super cold. Then they'll come out and they won't have cubs. What I know for a fact has happened in Colorado is you almost never see a sow without cubs. They'll keep them with them for like 2 years. So she's either going to have yearlings or she's going to have little bitty baby cubs. Very rare you see a dry sow in the last 3-4 years, and that's because we've had mild winters. That is my opinion. And then the guys in BC say the same thing, particularly north. Like a lot of the guys, Prince George and north, once you go north of there, I've talked to guys who've had areas for their entire life, 30, 40 years, and some of them say, 20 years ago, their black bears didn't exist there because they couldn't make it through winters, or at least like every 3 or 4 years they'd have a really hard winter and it would crush that population. You know what I mean? So they're kind of weird that way. And I think probably part of the little bear, there's probably a bunch of other things going on here in Colorado, but part of the bear explosion in Colorado is really a long string of mild winters, right? And sows that are all having pairs,
Yeah, for sure. As far as age class and size of bears, speaking of Colorado, does it historically kick out some big bears, or is it never known as a state that has big bears?
No, if you look through like Boone and Crockett's record books, Colorado's got some big bears, so it's not that it doesn't produce them. There's just not that high of a percentage of the bears really get hunted here. If you really think about it, they don't get hunted seriously. You know what I mean? There's a lot of tags sold, but guys, in the fall, it's very rare you're going to find a guy that's dead focused on killing big bears in Colorado. So,
but in Colorado, you can't use dogs. You can't use dogs at all, right, for bears?
Yeah, correct. So no dogs on bears and no bait. And then no spring season is the most significant, right?
Gotcha. And when did that change? When did it go where there's no spring bear hunting? How long ago?
I can't remember the exact date, Jay. Unfortunately, it was when I was young. I want to say it was like
okay, so it's
around
been 20-some years
or something. Yeah, okay. And it was a weird deal because it got when they did it all together. And then really what was kind of an unfortunate thing is part of that law when they passed it is there was no hunting before, I think no hunting of them before Labor Day. So even now, or something like that, or like September 2nd. So even in the fall, the guys the game management community is kind of crippled a little bit because, I see a lot of bears the last 2 weeks in August. It's one of the best times. If you're going to hunt them in the fall, it's one of the best times to actually go see them. But obviously you can't hunt them during that time because of the law. So with, really, they don't, I think it's like September 2nd is when you can start hunting them. It's kind of an additional unfortunate thing that went through that whole package.
Gotcha. Let's talk, so when you were up in BC, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the politics, didn't they just ban grizzly bear hunting in BC? And what was the general consensus with the guys and stuff that you talked to?
So they banned it, and it kind of, basically what happened was they had an election. They have a bunch of different parties, unlike here. So it's like when you're dealing with their political system, it's a lot different because it's different than what we're used to here. And what happened was the election went through, and then two of the minority parties got together, made a majority, and then kind of overnight banned the grizzly bear hunt, right? I would say that like the guiding community and outfitting community up there, and then the resident hunting community is pretty devastated by it. I can see why. I mean, I saw a lot of grizzlies while we were up there. They're doing fine, and they're a pain in the ass, to be honest, Jay. You know what I mean? I mean, grizzlies. What people don't understand is if you have grizzlies in your area, they are a pain in your butt as a resident hunter, outfitter, or whatever, right? And so it's really unfortunate when you see a pretty robust population, then overnight the deal gets banned. I think the bigger issue in BC, and it mirrors our issues here, is what you're really talking about is a certain segment of the population really has no representation, right? Think about, it's like the way I equate BC, it would be like if the way the political environment there is, it'd be equivalent to if California, the urban population in California ran everything from the coast of California to Oklahoma. That's how extreme the lack of representation is there in terms of, an urban population basically making rules for everybody. And this grizzly bear thing is like the epitome of that. I mean, you've got guys in the north of BC that's like as remote as it gets, and they were just told that now they can't kill a grizzly bear. Like, how insane is that? And the people who told them are the people sitting in Vancouver who have no interaction with them, have no clue what's going on biologically, and then most importantly, I think, they're never going to interact with them. It's not like all of a sudden, they're going to start having more grizzly bear viewing opportunities in Vancouver because of this, right? Because of them, they're banning bear hunting, a 20-hour drive away to the north. That I think is the more significant thing. And then also the people who are making this decision aren't the people that have to deal with the negative externality of grizzly bears. That's what people don't understand is like, grizzly bears are awesome. I think they're stunning to see. And for me, I haven't seen enough in my life to really, like, it's a non-event. When I see one, I think it's really cool. But for the guys that see them all the time, now all of a sudden you have a resource there that all it is negative, right? And that's an unfortunate deal, and you can sense their frustration there in a pretty significant way. I mean, the guys are like, it's kind of stunning to them, that it's been allowed to happen. And I think they're fearful for what's going to come.
How will that impact those black bear areas where if you're not killing grizzlies, will the grizzlies eventually push the black bears out? Will they compete for, space, and will it hurt the black bear population, or will it just move the black bear population?
Yeah, so I've seen grizzlies on literally the same slides as black bears, like the same snow slides. So it's not that it's not that they literally won't inhabit the same areas, but they do seem to keep a buffer, and there's no doubt that the grizzlies eat black bears. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't think that in terms of like, are you getting at like what the economic impact will be to the outfitters and guides, or is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean economic, and just the overall, biology of the thing. If are grizzlies going to eat all the black bears, and 10 years from now we'll be like, yeah, there are, the black bears are gone because the grizzlies ate them all. Will that happen, or is that a long ways out?
Yeah, so I think there's some biological reasons why that would be like a really slow process. There's no doubt that the grizzlies produce much slower than the black bears. They seem to have less cubs. They go more years between cubs, all of that, Jay. So I think I'm kind of speaking a little bit out of my comfort zone on my knowledge, but from what I've read, they're going to be a less dense species. But having said that, yeah, they're going to have an impact on the black bears. They're going to start competing on feed sources too. You know what I mean? Not only are they going to kill black bears, but they're going to compete for the same vegetation in the early spring and all of that. I think probably the bigger issue for BC is going to be on their moose, right? The grizzly bear, that's going to be really where the economics and the hunting opportunity for residents, outfitters, and everybody up there is really going to be the challenge with grizzlies. It's not that it'll be, moose is going to be the most significant one because that's the hot topic in BC right now, right? You've got their moose numbers are crashing and burning in a lot of areas. So when you add this deal, that's probably where like the management issues are going to come in, is that there's going to be an uproar by the fact that grizzlies are just killing a lot of moose calves. And that's proven. There's some really good academic research on how hard grizzlies are on moose calves. So that's where you're going to see the issue there for sure, or it's going to first pop wide open. But I don't know that their political environment really matters. And I think anybody that's interested in it should really read into it, because the U.S. situation is analogous to BC situation. We have the same thing in Colorado. It's the same political dynamic. You know what I mean, Jay? So they're both, what happens in one is basically going to happen in the other.
That's what I'm worried about. I want to take a quick second here and thank the sponsors of the podcast. I want to thank Go Hunt Insider, and if you're not a Go Hunt Insider, I highly encourage you to go check them out at gohunt.com. It's the best Western hunting resource out there. If you use the J Scott promo code, you're going to get a $50 Go Hunt Gear Shop gift card. You can immediately use that $50 to purchase something out of the store or put it towards a bigger purchase. They sell all kinds of great gear on their website. Being an Insider member, you get all kinds of access to the Western states, all the different units, the draw odds, the harvest statistics, and you can find those hidden gem units. I want to thank Go Hunt Insider for their sponsorship. I also want to thank KUIU.com, and I want to remind you guys that this Saturday, they're having the Mountain Academy there in Dixon, California at the KUIU headquarters. I believe it starts around 10 a.m., and there's going to be seminars kind of throughout the day. I know Jason Harrison, the founder of KUIU, is going to be doing two seminars, actually, the first and the last. Brendan Burns, the Guide and Outfitter Program Director, is going to be doing a seminar. Paul Bride, he's a world-renowned photographer, does most of the photos for KUIU, is going to be doing a seminar. I'm going to be doing a seminar, and Lance Kronberger from Freelance Outdoor Adventures, the guy that I'm hunting Dall sheep with, my second Dall sheep hunt this summer. That has a nice ring to it, doesn't it, Cliff? In August, I'm hunting with Lance, and come on out. They're going to give, I believe, a $250 gift certificate at each seminar. All you have to do is be present to win. If you can't make it out to Dixon, I know there's people that are actually flying in. I've had people say they're coming and what have you, so it's pretty cool. But if you can't make it in person, you can actually watch on the KUIU Facebook Live, and they're going to be broadcasting that. So I'd love to see you guys. Look me up if you're going to be out there. I want to thank KUIU for their sponsorship, and also the Outdoorsman's, 1-800-291-8065. The Optics Authority, if you use the JScott promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount, as well as at outdoorsmans.com. Cliff, I got some questions. So I've been over to the OT6. You came over last fall and ran around with Hunter and I for a couple days. Been running a bunch of trail cameras. We've got quite a few bears over there. From your perspective, I know we've talked about it on the podcast before. Bears are tough on elk. Talk a little bit about, what you've witnessed. Is having a bunch of bears a problem for sure if you're, trying to, conserve your elk and, grow older and bigger bulls. Obviously if they're killing calves, that's a bull 6 years, 7, 8 years from now that we'd want to kill. Talk a little bit about the predation factor that bears, provide on the landscape.
Yeah, so, it's a proven fact that once bears reach a certain density, and then you could argue that it's a learned behavior, but once they start doing it, they have a really significant impact on both fawns and elk calves. And there's some super good academic papers on it. I've read a lot of wildlife papers, and I have a fairly in-depth background in statistics. Probably, and not to sound like an egomaniac, but my statistical background's probably better than the vast majority of wildlife biologists. And so I've read through a lot of papers and really picked through the statistics, and I would say that very rarely do you find wildlife papers that would hold up to statistical rigor. It's really rare, and that's because it's really expensive to run the studies. It's really expensive to get high sample sizes, all the statistical stuff that you need to draw really good causality. I will say that there's several bear papers on predation of bears on elk calves that hold up really well in terms of statistical rigor, and one of them is from northern New Mexico, and I can't remember the gal's name. I have it written here, but it's a good paper, and everybody should read it. It's a huge sample size of calves, and that they were. I'm going to get it here, Jay, because I want people to be able to look it up. Let me see. I can't believe I can't find it. I always keep a link here, but anyways. It's a good paper. You can look it up if you Google like elk predation, or bear predation on elk calves in northern New Mexico. It'll come up. I think the gal's name is Tatman, who did it. I think it was maybe New Mexico State or something it was run out of. But if you read the paper, it's for sure a fact that once bears start doing it, they have a really significant effect on elk calves, to the point where, I think one of the statistical conclusions of that paper is that basically if you take an area where you haven't been hunting bears in the spring, and I think they actually used their Fish and Game department to do this, but one of the years of the study they actually instituted harvest of the bears during the spring, and those calves were 1.5 times more likely to survive. That's a massive that's insane. There's really no, I mean, I've never seen something like that in a paper where it's pretty solid statistically that that's probably going on, right? You can never know for sure, but the reality is that they caught enough calves that it's I mean, if you look at the statistic, it's pretty darn serious. And then the other part of that study, which is really interesting, and it's kind of I'd say it's kind of a caveat within the study, and that's they collared some of these bears and they saw what they did. And I mean, a lot of these bears will traverse like an insane amount of distance to get to calving ground, right? So a bear is not going to go 150 miles across some barren landscape for no reason, right? He's going there
to be turned down.
Yeah, exactly. So once they figure out how to do it,
when I head to Dairy Queen, if they're closed, I'm breaking in because I'm traveling to Dairy Queen to get my ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. So they got it figured out, right? And they show up in the calving ground, you know. And I mean, I've observed this myself, like for the last 5 years. They move into our alpine with the elk when they calve. It's obviously anecdotal because it's just me out there observing this, right? And what happens is that first 2 weeks of life on elk calves, they hammer them. They'll just grid an area that's calving grounds. Anybody who watches elk in normal conditions, they're basically going to go behind the snow until they calve, because they want to calve in that nice fresh green. That's what they do in Colorado. And like the last 5 years, I'd say, sure enough, bears are just working that same country back during calving season. And then basically the bears go back low. That's what happens in Eagle and Pitkin County. You know, you're going to see an influx of bears in the high country during calving and fawning season. You know, basically now. We're in the middle of it or at the end of it, let's say. So you're going to see them in the high country, and then all of a sudden you're going to see them turn around. They're going to be back down in the bottoms, back in town, whatever else. I actually had a game warden tell me that during calf, because nowadays, I mean, I was listening to this Vanilla podcast, and they had Bill Andre here, he's a local guy in my area, like the regional game warden, and he said some years they spend 50% of their time this year dealing with bears in town. I had a game warden tell me that during a short period in calving season, all of a sudden the bears disappear and then they show back up. That's like pretty obvious what they're doing. It's not like, you know, the garbage has changed in Aspen during that week. You know what I mean? They just go up there and kill elk calves and then come back to the garbage, you know? So it's like there's no doubt it's happening, and I would say that it's acknowledged, but the challenge is that how is it going to be dealt with, you know? I mean, I don't know. I mean, how many bears do you think you have on your place over there? I mean, have you been identifying several individual bears?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's really hard to say. Just going off, you know, I've just been over there a couple times checking trail cameras. I haven't actually been on, you know, foot, you know, out there looking around. But both times I went over there, I did see multiple sets of tracks driving around, and you know, I've gotten probably, I don't know, 8 or 10, you know, photos of bears that are probably different bears in my mind. I'm no bear expert at all, but just kind of looking at the photos, trying to, you know, come up with characteristics and such that, you know, like, oh yeah, that's that same sow, and you know, those same 2 cubs, and then okay, there's one, you know. So, you know, and it's not a very good sampling, but it just it's pretty cool, you know, that we've got them.
They're awesome. They're awesome to see. They're a neat animal to watch.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we kind of keep them in check. And you know, that's the other thing. I don't know, like, the territories they run, if those bears are, you know, they live on the ranch all the time, or are they just in and out, like you're saying, you know, they're down in town and then they're up there in the calving grounds. I think the next round of, you know, the cameras have now been soaking for probably 2.5 weeks, maybe, since I've been over there last. I think it'll be interesting this next series, this next series of photos when I check them just to see it, if any other bears have showed up or what's going on. But they're pretty neat. Those suckers, they get in those water troughs and they'll swim around in them, and it's just crazy to see what they do. Fortunately, they haven't messed with my cameras a whole lot, which I'm fully expecting them, to just be gnawing on them and curious and pawing them off. But I've had a few of them kind of moved, and then I'll get I'll catch picture of them, walking by, and then the next photo, there'll be their face in the camera, and it kind of moves it around. But I have yet to have any bears yank them off a tree or completely destroy them. But
and it's funny. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because even though we have a fairly high density of them, they rarely mess with my camps. And they, not like they will where they've been really habituated to people. So it is kind of interesting. But I'm with you on it, Jay. They're probably, in my mind, one of the coolest animals to watch. I mean, watching a sow with cubs is really awesome. I mean, they kind of have some human characteristics, like how they feed and stuff, and it's kind of neat. You know what I mean?
They're neat.
So I love watching them. But that doesn't make me think they're some species that doesn't need to be managed.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you're a realist. Speaking of your camps, what's going on? Flat Tops Wilderness Guides. I saw on your Instagram, looks like you're kind of starting to get some of the mules and stuff, making some trips and kind of getting them legged up a little bit, or what's going on?
Yeah, so we're starting to slowly kind of get, we had obviously a super early summer here. So it's funny because I kind of timed it this year to start a little bit later, because usually I can't even get into my highest camps till July 1st or 2nd. But this year, probably because I planned on starting later, it's the earliest year we could get going. So it's kind of ironic. But yeah, we're starting to haul horses. Jimmy's up there shoeing horses actually today. And we're just starting to pick away at things. We got trail to clear and all the stuff that you got to do before the season, and then, like you say, try to get a good set of your horses and mules legged up in shape for the season. So we're on that process. I think I have a couple openings for archery drop camps, but to be honest, I think that my flat tops deal, outfitting in general is a really good indicator of the economy, I think, because I've got all sorts of different type of clients across the economic tiers, and everybody seems to have more confidence and more disposable income. So pretty darn everything's booked up early and all that. Well, like the Canadians say, whenever you run into a Canadian nowadays, they say, "Hey, are you riding the Trump train?" And I assume that's what I am doing. But so it's all good on that front. We'll be busy. Yeah, they always say, "Oh yeah, are you guys riding the Trump train?" I mean, what people don't realize is that most rural Canadians, either hunting guys really in the hunting business or resource-oriented guys, I mean, they love Donald Trump. It's all they want to talk about. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. But yeah, are you riding the Trump train?
That's going to be the title of this episode. Speaking of moisture, snow, I mean, man, the Roaring Fork, it's been fishable now for a month. I mean, the green drakes usually are around July 1st. I mean, they've been hatching now down on the Colorado and moving up the Roaring Fork, for the last week. It's the earliest I can remember. I went over and floated the Gunnison. They're not even letting water out of that. I mean, they're looks like they're trying to retain all the water they got up there. Man, it's dry. What kind of conditions are you got up on the hill?
So everything just feels like a month before right? It feels like right now, all the vegetation,
early.
everything, everything looks like a month early, right? Looks like it's the end of July right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing columbines, at 9,000, 9,500 feet. I mean, blooming like crazy. And man, it seems like columbines typically don't really get going till like right around that last week of June. It just seems like everything's way early this year.
Yep. Yeah, I would reiterate the same thing. And I think what happens, it was nice that I was driving back a couple nights ago. It was nice to see that we were getting some precipitation, but I think that whatever happens here in the next month is going to be really relevant in terms of how bad it's actually going to be. It's obviously going to be bad. It's going to be dry. There's going to be water problems, like in terms of a water rights kind of spectrum. I don't know how it'll, you know better than I do on the fishing, Jay. But in terms of the hunting, for me, we're blessed with an area that has a lot of water, so I'm not really. It doesn't seem to me that we have really big differences in like antler growth and stuff like that in dry years.
Yeah.
I think the biggest factor for us and the whole area is just what the fire situation is going to be, right? Which is an uncontrollable thing at this point for us. So that's probably my biggest concern. How that's going to pan out.
Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing and doing a little bit of research. They're saying a wetter than normal monsoon, and wetter forecasted for the upcoming months, which is great. The challenge is it's so dry, and I mean, all my listeners from Arizona, New Mexico, like Nevada, Utah, as soon as those monsoons kick up and we start getting a lot of those lightning strikes, that's when it's scary. Hopefully we'll get a bunch of rain and a few storms and, at least wet it up a little bit. But that lightning is some scary stuff.
Funny. It's funny you say that because that's like my exact feeling on it. Everyone's like, oh, well, monsoon season's supposed to be early. And it's like, well, we all know what comes with that, and that's exactly what you're getting at. If it's already burn up and dry, it's great to get some water. It'll get a little feed going again, but lightning comes with it,
Yeah.
And that's the scary component of that. But I don't know. I mean, there's that's another thing about Eagle and Pitkin County and Garfield County that a lot of people will say, on the elk front and the deer front, we probably need some big fires, but that's easy to say,
Right.
It's still scary.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Tell me about this long-range shooting. So you're traveling all around. I can't even keep up with you. And then you get home for a few days, and then you're doing a long-range shooting school. What'd you learn?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I'm an expert long-range shooter, but I've had a lot of interest, particularly on like the sheep and goat hunts that I guide. That there's becoming a more and more interest in that. So I've worked with some guys, chatted with some guys about trying to bring some hunters to their schools. So this last week I went to Ward Bryan's school down there near Antimony, Utah. I spent 3 days there. And I learned a lot, Jay, and particularly coming from, probably not a real in-depth knowledge standard on that front. I guide a lot, but I don't do a lot of shooting myself, admittedly. So it's something I've been trying to build up on just so I can help my hunters more and understand their equipment, understand what they need from a guide in terms of the long-range stuff. So it helped me get up to par on that. I think, he has the thing for me, what's interesting on the long range thing is I've always primarily hunted in the mountains, and my only complaint about the long range thing in general is that if guys are planning on shooting long range, and let's say, in my view, that's 500 yards and above or 450 and above, like that, to me, that's pretty extreme long range when you're talking about actually shooting at animals. If you're going to pursue that, you really need to have some knowledge about how effective you really are in the mountains. And one thing about what kind of got me interested in doing Ward's class is that his range is in the mountains, and it's in that part of Utah where it's always windy as all get out, and it's a lot of different type of winds. And I'll tell you, man, if a guy has done a lot of long-range shooting on like a flat area with one consistent wind, it's my opinion is that even if you're holding tight groups at 800 or 900 yards, it's almost irrelevant to mountain hunting. You really need to get some exposure to actually shooting angles, shooting in like really tough winds. If anything, to just be humbled by it, because I am. I mean, when you get to those long distances, you know, miss calls on wind, you can miss targets by 3-4 feet pretty easily, you know. So I think that's probably the part of it, at least for me, has been knowledge building, is that like the mountain environment, it makes long range shooting a whole different game. You know what I mean? Have you had much exposure to it, Jay, or do you do it yourself?
I really haven't. You know, Dar and I used to shoot, this goes back like 15, 20 years. We used to shoot quite a bit, and it's just, you know, it's just something that I'm really not that into. And kind of like, you know, I've got these 2 Dall sheep hunts coming up, and I wish I was probably more apt than I am, and, you know, better at it than I am. But it's almost one of those things, like the more you know, sometimes it just cracks your confidence, because you're like, holy smokes, how do I even hit the target? Like, it's just crazy when you have, you know, multiple different wind directions, and then you, like you're saying, you throw in angles there. It's like, how do we ever hit anything, you know? And where we used to just be like, okay, yeah, aim a little left because you got, you know, wind coming from left or right. And
yeah,
just to think that we've hit anything in our hunting career is sometimes mind-boggling to me.
Yeah,
I mean, definitely something I'd like to learn more about. For me, it's always just been a time. I just need to set time aside and go to some of these schools and learn more, because I do love to learn, for sure.
Yeah,
and if I was doing more personal hunts, you know, I'd probably be way more into it than, you know, I'm just doing so, you know, I've been doing so much guiding over the last, you know, 15 years that it's probably something that I've needed to do, and I just haven't done it.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I'm kind of in the same boat. But yeah, I'm the same thing. Like, I love learning about it because it's a new thing. I do think that, like, a lot of that, I mean, one thing, there seems to be a ton of good schools now, and it seems like, I think that even if guys aren't going to shoot above 500 yards ever, like, having that knowledge base, it probably makes you significantly more proficient at the standard yardage, right? You know, 150 to 400 yards. Probably make it.
I will tell you, some guys from Oregon came down and peace deer hunted with us. It was actually the group that Sean shot that big giant buck, and they're I don't want to say disciples, but they're, you know, followers of that Bob Beck, and they were, I mean, during the day, what they wanted to do was shoot rocks at, you know, 7, 8, 9, 1,000, 1,200, you know, 1,300 yards, and, you know, pick rocks out, and they, you know, do all their stuff, and they liked that almost as much as they enjoyed the hunt. I mean, they loved shooting during the middle of the day, and just shot and just had a ball. And it was kind of interesting.
Well, yeah, and I think that's how. And I didn't, you know, like, I grew up around the mentality, and then a lot of my, you know, guiding crew was like this too. Like, you sight your gun in, and then you go hunting. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of it. I think that one thing nice about the long range thing, for at least for me, is it's got me shooting my gun a lot more. And doing like what you're talking about, like shooting at rocks, and then, like, you know, guessing on what the wind's going to be, what it's going to affect, and then shoot at a rock and realize, like, get immediate feedback. I called it right, I called it wrong, or whatever. And for me, that's been, you know, it's it's helped my just overall marksmanship, I'm sure, quite a bit. It's a tough one. It's kind of, there's still a fair amount of controversy around it, and I can see both sides of things, but it is what it is. It just in the mountain environment, I still, being around some really good long range guys, I think anytime somebody's getting into that 800-yard kind of range and above, it's pretty tough to say that you're going to be proficient on your first shot until you got the wind right,
I think the one thing the long range, kind of push has done is it's gotten people shooting their guns more. I think you make a great point.
Exactly.
Even if you're only shooting at 250 yards, but you've been out shooting 800, 900, 1,000, and you've been shooting your gun more, it's just, you're going to be better. It's most of the time, the more you shoot your gun and the more proficient you are and the more you're, comfortable with it, you're gonna shoot way better at 200-300 yards, which most shots on hunts are 200-300, maybe out to 400 yards, but that 300-350 range, and like anything else, if you're shooting your bow at 100 yards and you do that enough, when you get to 40 and 50 yards, it almost seems close. It almost seems like a chip shot and makes it easier. So that's all good.
Yeah.
I saw that on your Instagram.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you just said. That's kind of my takeaway from doing it, So they're fun. I think everybody should do one of those courses. They're pretty awesome and pretty telling. The other thing you said, Jay, which I think is spot on, is that you all of a sudden you get knowledge about things that you don't know about, and that's really like eye-opening, Yeah. What's a lot. What it reminds me a lot about was I for my goat hunting, I had lost a goat with a hunter in the rocks. I just couldn't. It was kind of a marginal shot was made, and the goat traveled a whole lot of distance, and he got into a situation where I couldn't get him. It was kind of devastating to me. So I had gone out and decided that I'd get really proficient at rappelling and ropes and that sort of thing. And immediately once I started going down that road, I was immediately realized that I should have been dead already probably 5 or 6 times. Just because
that's humbling, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You immediately realize all the stuff you didn't know, and it kind of opens your eyes.
Yeah. Speaking of goat hunts, sheep hunts, and then I'll let you go. Do you have a nice slate? I know you just love those goat hunts. Do you have some goat hunts lined up for this fall?
Yeah, I got 3 goat hunts, and then I got 2 sheep hunts, which is great, including one in my home unit. So that'll be fun.
Nice.
I think I'm kind of tapped out. Jimmy's got. I think I got Jimmy doing 1 goat hunt, and then he's kind of looking for 1 more at the end of September. So we'll have a fair share of them. We'll be out chasing them around. You've got to be excited for yours, huh?
I am. I'm excited. I'm been training. Oh, did you do the Leadville 100?
I didn't because so I was invited to that shoot. No, so I was invited to that shooting class, so we postponed it. We're going to do the Aspen one next month.
The Aspen one. Oh my goodness, what a savage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Leadville one is
it's the hardest one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more difficult just because of the elevation grade, but just the dates, we got jammed up on dates. But I see you've been doing a fair amount of running, huh?
Not running, but hiking. And I had a local friend here that listens to the podcast that I've ate lunch with over here, and he's like, hey, let me know, I want to come work out with you. And I said, nope, no locals allowed. And he just started laughing. I said, I'm not about to take you local that lives here all year long and take you hiking at all. No thanks. And he was giving me a hard time. But, yeah, I'm just, the thing that always, we talk about humbling, you start adding weight to your pack, going up and down, and it makes a huge difference. I mean, I've been yeah, I mean, it's just like today I'm just going. I found a couple ski runs that are pretty steep. I mean, I think they're double black diamonds and they're long. And, like 2.5 miles up, and it's just solid scree and rock. And so I've been with my pack on, trekking poles, like trying to stimulate that, sheep hunting, what I think it's going to be like there. And, I got halfway up today, and I'm just going and going and going, and I finally just stopped, and I'm looking around, and I'm going, I ain't ready. Like, I'm glad the hunting's starting tomorrow because, so I'm just going to keep plugging away at it. But I don't know if it's ever a thing that you ever are going to be like, okay, I'm ready, because, I know the Northwest Territories, I mean, my Chugach hunt, from what I hear, is going to be just brutal, tough country compared to the NWT. But,
right.
I mean, I'll be ready regardless. But I think it's one of those things that I don't ever think there's like, oh, yeah, I'm in great shape, like I'm ready to, like the mountain always humbles you, period. Like,
for sure. Well, and you're lucky because you're probably in one of the you're living in one of the best areas ever to train for that sort of thing. So that's pretty awesome. I caught your podcast with, I can't remember who it was, but with guys that had been up there to the NWT, one of your recent ones.
Oh yeah, Brian Rimsdale. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear how they prepared. It was interesting. I almost was like talking to. I was listening to I was listening to the podcast in my truck when I was driving, and I almost was like speaking out loud when you guys got on the hiking downhill with your knees, because I have I have horrendous knees. I had them MRI. What do you call it? Where they look at them. An MRI.
MRI.
What is it? Yeah.
MRI.
Look at it. Yeah, MRI. That's right. And the doctor told me that I had the knees of a 65-year-old. And I just had to laugh.
You're still in your 30s.
Yeah, exactly. But I had to laugh because there's no way, and I'm not trying to go against the guys that were on your thing, but there's no way I can train with weight going downhill. It's just it just creates that's like a guaranteed way for me to be hurt before a hunt like that. But I understand.
For sure.
Go ahead.
I think he's trying to say to just simulate the conditions. He's also in his 30s as well, and I'm 45, and I've got to just really watch it. So like the last couple days, so I've gone up those free fields and down those free fields, but I just go extra slow going down, and I really just try and focus on every step, making good, like I'm not on a race. I'm not. And that's why when my buddy's like, hey, I'll go with you, it's like, no, I'm just doing it. I want to do it at my own speed because I'm competitive and I know how, I'll want to be like, well, let's just, let's go. I want to just make sure that I, just do my thing. And, I keep telling myself, listen, you go up there, more than likely the guide's going to be in better shape than you. It's not a race. You just go and keep one foot in front of the other and keep going. The reality is you just got to be able to go for, 10 days in a row. And I'm excited to look at a bunch of sheep. I've never even seen a Dall sheep. And to think that, here in a couple months I could potentially have harvested 2 of them is mind-boggling. And guys are like, oh man, what do you expect? What do you want? I'm like, honestly, and people that know me pretty well, they know. I honestly don't even care if I even get one on either hunt. I just want to go. I want to see rams. I want to be able to look at them. I love studying and field judging, and I just want to take in the whole experience. And I'm not just going to shoot a ram on the first day. If it's a big one, I'll shoot it. But I want to go and get a couple nice rams, and I don't have to kill one. And it's always nice, I think, and it's how I've been for quite a while. Like if killing something is like the ultimate goal, and that's going to define the success of the hunt, to me, it makes the hunt so much better if you're like, I went on the goat hunt last year, and we only saw one mature billy. it's fine. Guys are like, oh, are you disappointed? I'm like, no, I don't really care. I don't, if I'm going to shoot one, I want it to be a nice one. If it's a nice one.
Sure. Well, and I think I think on these type of hunts, like it mitigate, because on these type of hunts, you're going to have some like logistical issue at some point. There's just no doubt, right? So it makes like those situations like a lot less like ruining the hunt type of thing or inducing all this anxiety or whatever. So I think it's like, obviously you're going to hunt hard and try to find the biggest ram you can, but that attitude is a whole lot. I get it. It makes a lot of sense. And you get a lot more.
Well, I've just learned it makes those hunts, it just makes them much more enjoyable when, it's like, I want to see grizzly bears. I want to see mountain caribou. I want to see whatever's up there and just enjoy it. And honestly, if I didn't kill a ram on either hunt, it's fine. People are like, oh, that's a lot of money. Like, I don't even look at it like that. Like, it's, totally new to me. And it's exciting. I'm pumped. So
yeah, Arctic Red, that Arctic Red trip, that's on my bucket list for sure. Particularly after spending some time with Ben Storek, he's guided up there for a long time. It's like that'll be an awesome trip. I got to do it at some point. And you should get him on the podcast too. I don't think you're gonna find another guy that has quite the just a lot of experience there. And plus, he's a good guy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, buddy, it's always great having you on. Want to encourage the listeners to check you out. Where can they find you, Cliff? Yeah,
so like you said, my Instagram is Cliff, Cliffgry. That's probably your best bet to keep up to date. And then all my Canadian stuff, Aoudad hunts, all the stuff that's not the Colorado hunts that I do here, I'm starting to do those all under kind of a new little business I spun off called True Hunts. So truehunts.com, you can find all the info on those, and then ftguides.com is all my Colorado stuff. But yeah, no, like always, I always enjoy interacting with your listeners. Just a couple days ago, I got the funniest, I got to say this one last thing because it just cracks me up, Jay. I got a message from a guy, super nice guy. He said, Cliff, during podcasts, you always say, quote, I don't want to get too political, and then quote, he's like, next podcast, and then he said, next podcast, I want you to get political because I'm interested in what you have to say. So I said, I'll work on that. But anyways, your guys are always, it's always fun talking to your listeners. So you know what your listeners are? Your listeners are, they're always like, they're learners. So I think that's cool. You know what I mean? That's kind of one of the flavors of your, one of the things of your podcast. That, yeah, for sure. When your guys call me, these guys just look, not looking for information or anything like that. They're more just have a genuine interest in a lot of the stuff. Yeah. So that's cool.
Yeah. Well, my wife would argue anybody that will sit and listen to me for an hour is definitely got issues. So you listeners out there, I guess you got issues because my wife says so. So, Cliff, I appreciate it, and to the listeners, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Cliff, until next time, God bless. If I don't talk to you, or you and Amy run that Aspen race, have fun and be safe. And I leave July 12th, so I'll hopefully have a whole slug of pictures and videos and all kinds of stuff of some Dall sheep, some mountain caribou, maybe even a grizzly or two. So.
Awesome.
All right, buddy.
Good luck,
I'll catch you later.
Stay safe. Bye.
All right.